The year 1933, parts of Oklahoma ravaged by the Dust Bowl, and the country in the midst of the Great Depression. And 1 in 3 Oklahomans are on some type of government relief. But during these dire days began 2 programs that improved lives around the country and gave us buildings and landmarks we still enjoy today. Standing atop a rocky outlook over glimmering waters, Tucker Tower is an iconic landmark that can be seen from most any vantage point on Lake Murray. Limestone slabs cut by hand and stacked skyward. An ideal lookout to see the beauty of this area outside Ardmore, Oklahoma. But it's inside the tower, lining the walls, the story of how America worked its way out of the Great Depression and is best told by the Oklahoma History Center's Bob Blackburn.
Despite the boom in farm and ranch from 1898 to 1929, despite the oil boom from 1905 in Glenpool to the 1930s, Oklahoma finally descended into the black hole of the Great Depression. Bank closures, people going unemployed, people leaving, hitting the road. The Grapes of Wrath would depict one of those families leaving the land and going to California. Almost a third of all Oklahomans unemployed. And I think most importantly, people were losing hope. They were losing hope that tomorrow would be better. We've had these boom times, now we're on the slide down. We had to do something to improve the morale, as well as to put food on the table. There was no Social Security system at the time. There was no welfare department in the state of Oklahoma. You were on your own unless a family member or a church or the community would step up and say, we will help.
And it was during these desperate times, just days after taking the oath of office,
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God.
President Roosevelt signs into law the Federal Unemployment Relief Act.
We started really in 1933 with the CCC, one of my favorite programs in American history, especially when you think about what it did for that generation and what it's done for us ever since. And the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, was a brainchild coming out of the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration, one of the earliest of the New Deal programs, trying to provide direct relief for the unemployment and the suffering. And it was not welfare. It was, let's go to work. Let's do something that helps the community. And these kids, aged 18 to 25, would go off into a military-type setting, and they would get training from Army personnel. So they would drill. So they were learning discipline. They were learning how to work together. They were learning skills. And then the objective of the CCC was, as the name implied, conservation. Let's build shelter belts. Let's take care of erosion. Let's go into communities and do something together to conserve the quality of life in a community with an amphitheater, or a public library, or a public swimming pool, or bridges that needed to be repaired so people could get from here to there. And so the CCC was one of those early programs that made such a vital difference. And then on the other side of that coin, the public side to the private side, those kids were learning lessons about life, and they had the ability to send $25 of their $30 monthly pay home to the family. That money was used generally to put food on the table, to provide the necessities of life at a time when people were wondering, where is my next meal coming from? And leading to the desperation of the Joad family in Grapes of Wrath and saying, I've got to get out of here. I've got to leave my home. I've got to leave my family, my roots, my church, and hit the road into the great unknown. That's an act of desperation. That's what we were dealing with in the early 1930s.
So essentially recognizing at the time that a public works program was better than public assistance.
Exactly, and that was the beauty of the CCCs. And then that would continue with the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, as it's better known. Now that came a little later in Oklahoma because we had a governor at the time, Alfalfa Bill Murray, who was an old-time populist, states' rights advocate. He did not want the federal strings on grants. And the WPA, the PWA, the Public Works Administration, as well as the Works Progress Administration, provided block grants to the states. And then the theory is that the state, then working through its sub-units, such as the Parks Department that was created in the 1930s, cities and counties, would then raise the money for the materials, and the PWA, WPA would provide the money for the labor, with the idea we are going to put people to work. We're going to put a shovel in their hand. We're going to get them on a project, building a city hall, a convention center, a county courthouse, a bridge, a road, whatever it was that would improve the quality of life. That's how that money would be spent. And it was not geared to efficiency so much and mechanization, but it was geared to employing people. So yes, you might have been able to hire a crew on a tractor to do something in a week, but instead they would employ 30 people and take a month. And so the mission was really a dual thing. It was to do something for the community and then to provide employment for these people who wanted to work but had no opportunity to work. Instead of taking a handout, they were given a hand up.
And with guidance from experienced craftsmen, the CCC enrollees were able to take stone that was quarried from right here in the state park and hand-hewn lumber and turn it into beautiful buildings that have withstood the test of time.
You can go into almost any community and I can recognize WPA architecture. It was a certain style. You can go into a state park like Murray State Park and go to Tucker Tower, and there are about another dozen or so buildings that date to the CCCs. You can go into Old Platte National Park, Chickasaw Recreation Heritage Area, and see the picnic pavilions. It's a very definite style, inspired by the National Park Service architecture that you still can see in Yellowstone. You can see it at the Grand Canyon. Well, the states were adopting the same. It was a very organic architecture, using natural materials, cut to look as they might have in the natural state, instead of doing the manufactured, the machined look. It's going back to nature and that organic architecture. You see it in the armories that are made out of not cut stone, but natural stone. You see it in the big log timbers used as rafters in some of these outdoor pavilions. You see the big massive piles of stone that tie the architectural style of a building to the ground. It's a particular style that's pervasive throughout Oklahoma. And many of those buildings are still being used, no matter what community you're in. And you can drive down Route 66 and find those structures, or you can go to any community. It's all around us, still making a difference.
And while it's the infrastructure we may see, these programs, these WPA programs, also were worried about preserving some cultural heritage.
They were. The WPA also wanted to make a difference in arts, in the literature area of our culture. And so they created programs such as the Oklahoma Writers Project. Well, at the time, the state got the block grant, and the money was given to the Oklahoma Historical Society of that day and time. We had just built the old historical building, that's now the Judicial Building, 21st and Lincoln, and we had the space in the building, and so unemployed journalists, unemployed writers, and others who had some writing ability were hired in the Writers Project, and they were sent out into the state, the Indian Pioneer Papers, interviews with pioneers and Indians who had made the Trail of Tears in the 1830s and 40s, were still around at the time. So those memories were collected and written in books. Today, the Indian Pioneer Papers, 116 volumes of first-person narrative from our pioneering experience, indexes to newspapers, histories of local communities, landmarks. It added to our understanding of Oklahoma, and at the same time, it employed those people who had some skills that were misapplied using a shovel on a highway, but they could sit at a typewriter and write the story of a pioneer who founded the town of Chickasha or Waurika or some other little town.
And unique artwork hanging in many of our federal buildings too come from that era.
Exactly. The Arts Project would be used. American Indians who were just learning to express themselves in a new way through their own interpretation of art were hired to do murals. There was an entire book about Indian New Deal art in Oklahoma post offices and public buildings.
Employing more than 90,000 Oklahomans. But just as importantly, what the CCC and the WPA did was prepare what's been called the greatest generation of Americans for the storm clouds of war that was soon to be on their horizon.
Well, of course, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the nation had to come together immediately. And you saw that with the leadership of Franklin Roosevelt, the leadership in the Congress, and the nation rallied to one purpose. I believe that the 1930s lead up to that had an impact because instead of everyone out on their own, survival of the fittest, if you were hungry, too bad if you couldn't find it. The weak shall perish and the strong shall survive. Well, instead of that, you had these programs that draw us back together, using facilities that are part of these programs to build infrastructure. It was for us, not for one company, not for one person, but it was for all of us. And that sense of community was at the heart of the CCC and the WPA and the PWA in trying to work together for the common good. And with that culture there at the grassroots level, when it's time to go to war, when we have to be united, one voice speaking and determined to win, then we were ready.
And despite their legacy, FDR's New Deal programs do have their detractors. If you'd like to make up your own mind and learn more about the history of the New Deal, after the show, head to our website at okhorizon.com and look for a link we have set up to one of my favorite spots on the web. It's called Crash Course in U.S. History, where you can get pretty educated in about 15 minutes.